So why did we need to change the system is my question. And I suppose first and foremost, what we have to remember is that we are the most regulated, the most scrutinised, the most transparent police service in the world. And we have police forces come in and justice agencies from all over the globe to see how we do things. So we didn't start in a bad position in terms of that transparency, but some of the system problems were long-standing. And I think it would be fair to say that everybody in the room, and myself included, thought that the system was far too adversarial. There was too much of a search for blame and really not an approach which characterised learning and reflection. And we were a bit behind the curve. So fortunately, by all working together, we managed to get the right ideas and also had an opportunity to change the system, to make it more transparent, to stop a fishing expedition approach, to focus investigations, to focus on timeliness, but also to create the space within the definitions so that we can reflect in a way which allows people to learn from when things have not gone probably right and put it right. And sorry is one of the hardest words to say, but we as a service always seem to have found it very difficult. And then the last bits to mention on why we needed to change is really because the system's also about complainants, not just officers. And I know we remember that, but on occasions those that scrutinise us sometimes don't remember that. So we needed to get the balance right. It's good if it's timeliness, it's focus for everybody, the officer, the complainant, and the view of the public on the system. So they're the main reasons why we did change it.
You've just heard from Chief Constable Craig Guilford on why we needed to improve the system. But how do we actually make that happen? The government's reforms to the police complaints and discipline systems didn't happen overnight. In fact, they've been several years in the making. But there's a good reason for that. A careful, considered approach to create a system which works for all. A system which is both fair for officers, but also helps to secure public trust and confidence in policing. So what's the background? Our reform started long ago when Major General Chip Chapman conducted his review of the police disciplinary system in 2014. This led to a public consultation on proposed changes so that we could understand from the public and you, the sector, just what the system needed to make it better. Making these policy changes has been truly a collective effort. The Home Office established key stakeholder groups, including the Complaints Practitioners Working Group and the Police Integrity Policy Group, and worked closely with the MPCC and their national working groups. These provided an opportunity for frank, honest, and open discussions about what was wrong with policing, what was wrong with the police complaints and discipline system, and where changes ought to be made. All of this helped us understand exactly what was important to our policing stakeholders, from rank and file officers through the Police Federation to police chiefs through the MPCC. Our task was to devise a system that addressed the concerns of policing stakeholders, that addressed responses to the public consultation, and importantly, delivered the ambitions of our ministers for a more transparent, more independent, and more proportionate system. This early engagement with the sector allowed us to have the right people around the table, giving us early feedback. This meant that we developed proposals that we were confident would be well received when we entered into formal consultation through the Police Advisory Board. We, of course, had setbacks and challenges along the way. Brexit and elections in particular added unfortunate but unavoidable delays. However, ongoing collaboration and engagement between the Home Office and stakeholders, including your Police Federation board members, was critical to us continuing to make good progress. We started with a common aim, a system in which officers aren't punished for simple mistakes or errors, but they're instead supported to learn and develop, but also a system which recognises the significant impact that serious misconduct has on public confidence, and so is tough on those officers who seriously breach the standards of professional behaviour. And together we've achieved a common goal, a much improved system, one which is more proportionate, more timely, more transparent, and yet still holds that level of accountability needed to secure and maintain public confidence in the police. So what are the changes that we made? Well, reflective practice signals a culture change in how conduct and performance matters should be handled. We know that in the past, too many lower level matters, mistakes, errors, and misjudgments was subject to unnecessary investigations. These are matters which are better dealt with by the officer sitting down with their line manager to reflect on what's happened and how they might have dealt with the situation differently. We want to move away from a system based on blame or exoneration and little in between for even minor matters. As professionals, we can always improve. And when we've made a mistake or we could have handled a situation better, we should all be prepared to reflect openly and learn from it as part of our professional development. We know this isn't the end of the journey. As the system beds in, we're closely monitoring its success and, where necessary, able to step in and make adjustments. And we did exactly this recently when concerns were raised around how to use reflective practice in the handling of complaints. Working jointly with the MPCC, IOPC, and the College of Policing, we analysed the data, we made changes to the IT system, and we issued new guidance, quickly removing bureaucratic processes which were interfering with the transition to a learning-based approach. But what is absolutely clear to all of us so far is that we're moving in the right direction. We may wear different hats, but this work has been an example of how we can use this to our advantage, driving new regulations and a new culture.
At the IOPC, we support the aims of the legislative reforms to make the complaints and discipline system more transparent, more independent, more proportionate, and less bureaucratic. The changes provide an opportunity for the system to become more balanced, not just focused on individual blame, but also on systemic learning and improvement. It is right that discipline should be reserved for genuine misconduct, with other matters dealt with through individual reflection and improvement. The revised definition of misconduct should help to achieve this. We also support complaints being dealt with at an appropriate level that allows the complainant's concerns to be addressed rather than taking all complaints through a more lengthy bureaucratic process, regardless of the nature of the complaint or what the complainant wants. So are the reforms working? Our oversight team has carried out work to assess forces' handling of complaints in the new system. They reviewed over 300 files across 8 forces. Encouraging, we found forces are generally applying the correct standards when assessing complaints. So what else did this review tell us? It says we are seeing evidence of good quality review handling and effective oversight from PCCs. Widening the definition of a complaint to include all expressions of dissatisfaction and not just conduct matters, and requiring these to be formally logged, has seen a 110% increase in complaints, which indicates a more accessible system. 40% of the allegations have been handled outside of Schedule 3 of the Police Reform Act, so we're seeing quicker and more informal handling of complaints, which is encouraging. The volume of finalised Schedule 3 allegations addressed through investigations fell from 40% of allegations recorded to 3%. Reviews also appear to be falling in number. The system is making access easier and there is less likely to be a request for review. Forces are making apologies, providing explanations and identifying individual and organisational learning. All positive signs. So what next? The legislative changes are a step in the right direction, but they only take us so far. There are some things which need more focus. For example, Home Office research identified that reflective practice was used inconsistently across forces. We've encouraged forces to use this more, and it appears to be gaining some traction. We know from our research that the public place a high degree of importance on learning and change within police forces. But we still need to see cultural change to a more customer-focused approach and ongoing efforts from all stakeholders in the complaint system to make sure the reforms achieve the benefits we all want. Although the reforms are aimed at simplifying the system, we know it can still be complicated. One of the things we are looking at is a proposal for a support or information service to help complainants navigate the system. So positive signs, some great work, but there's always more to be done. We all have a role to play in a strong and robust police complaint system, and I look forward to continuing work with you to achieve this.
Good afternoon, conference. Since before my time as a national rep, the Federation have been campaigning for a fairer, more streamlined discipline system, one that dwells more on learning the lessons and changing policy and procedures rather than simply blaming and punishing individuals. This has been highlighted not just by us, but by many of the varied reviews into the police conduct system over the years. The Morris report back in 2004 complained that the system was slow and bureaucratic. The Taylor Review in 2005 prompted the then Home Secretary to say, police disciplinary arrangements need to move away from being lengthy, costly, heavily regulated and punitive. And then the Chapman Review in 2014, again highlighting that the system needed to be speeded up and streamlined to balance punitive sanctions with rehabilitation and to deal with matters at the lowest possible level. All repeated familiar themes. All these reviews did lead to successive changes in regulations. So why do we need a new 2020 set? Whether it was human nature, people reverting to what they know, the status quo is after all easier. Was it the legal mindset of forces? If a standard is broken, some form of penalty has to follow. The drafting of the regulations being too open to interpretation by individual decision makers, or just the self-imposed need of an organisation to blame an individual in order to satisfy some perceived public outrage that it thinks might be there. Over the years, we in the Federation have worked hard with the police chiefs, the Home Office, and all the other stakeholders to try and get that culture that everyone wanted to actually happen. That has all led us to the 2020 regulations, which, like the other earlier versions, should, if adopted properly, lead us to where the service has been trying to get to for all these years. So where are we a year on? Have they done what they set out to do? And have we arrived at that new culture? What hasn't helped is that these regulations came into force with the country in the grip of a pandemic, and only a few weeks after they started by almost complete lockdown across England and Wales. Most complaints departments ground to a halt just when we wanted them to get to grips with the new ethos and culture that these regulations promote. So it's been a really disruptive period to try and establish the new mindset, as well as monitoring if it's actually working. From what our conduct leads across the country have been saying, there have been some teething troubles, but most are confident on balance that the new regulations have had a positive effect. So where are the rubs? What's good and what's not so good? The new rules have some very good parts to them. The first, a raised bar for what constitutes misconduct. So in theory, it should be harder to get into trouble. And a new streamlined practice requiring improvement, or PRI procedure, that sits underneath in order to embed learning quickly. However, the most common complaint from our perspective around the country is that appropriate authorities are still struggling with this change severity assessment, choosing to still investigate cases through misconduct that probably should have been sent back to managers for speedy PRI processes, only making that PRI decision after a lengthy investigation, defeating the point and purpose of the rules. Now, that may be due to risk aversion, unfamiliarity, or just being litigation conscious. However, this is a culture that we need to reset. A changed outcome for the fewer cases that reach a meeting or a hearing, with longer warnings and a reduction in rank now being possible to reflect the increased severity assessment. However, chairs of some meetings and hearings, we feel, still haven't understood the new threshold as well as they should, and are reluctant to send things back for PRI, either mistakenly believing or being instructed that because there's a breach of standards in front of them, they can't rule on that threshold and have to give one of the more severe sanctions. Again, this is a mindset that needs challenging and changing. And timeliness, one of the main problems from all sides with the old regime. We now have an explanation if a case goes beyond 12 months, which is fantastic. And only a few cases have so far reached that threshold, which is again great. However, this remains a real concern and focus for us as your staff association. There are still absolutely no consequences for appropriate authorities not abiding with this. So we're still actively campaigning on time limits, and we've proposed an amendment to try and see teeth added to the regulations, which will benefit both officers and complainants alike. Now, I'm sure all these issues can and will be resolved. In fact, they have to be resolved unless we want the 2020 regulations to end up just like all the others that have gone before, and us simply reverting back to the old blame and punishment because it's easy and because it's what we know. Under the COVID crisis, we've not had the easiest of circumstances in which to embed these changes and change the culture and ethos of the complaint system. There's still more to be done, but what we have seen is the green shoots of progress, change which we will continue to champion on your behalf. Thank you for listening.